You have started your own podcast. You are new. You wonder, what the hell am I doing? You feel you're bumbling through. Well, today we will discuss podcasting tips and tricks from the master of podcasting, Gord Vickman, who's the podcast manager from Strategic Coach, podcast host of Podcast Payoffs, and also has 10 years of morning radio hosting experience in a major market. Gord, welcome.
Thank you. I'm flattered. That was a beautiful, eloquent introduction. I don't know if I can call myself the master, but
Well, to
I,
me,
I do
you
my
are.
best. I do my best. I mean, He-Man was the master of the universe. I mean, we got to give props to him. I mean,
Fair
he was
enough.
holding
Fair
it
enough.
all down, but I
So
do
you're
my
saying I'm
best.
Skeletor?
You could be. I mean, I don't. You're not wearing like a purple hood, so I
Well, that's
don't.
at night. That's at night.
Oh, I see. I see.
And to the listeners, you can tell this guy has been on radio before. So, Gordon, I got you on here because you were very instrumental in helping me start my podcast off on the right foot, and you provide a lot of advice on the go. And I've really appreciated that. And I do know 12 people have reached out to me and said they've started a podcast because of my podcast that I created. And I'm flattered with that. It's very much to do with your input and also Nicole Solitar from your office as well. And so quite a few people are asking me how to start a podcast and that, and I can only get to so far. And I want to see if you can help us just get over that next hurdle or whatnot with your experience, because you've been the podcast manager. Give us a little bit of background of your radio experience and podcast experience.
Sure. So I started in the radio business in this is 2004, and I got very, very lucky because I popped right out of school. And in radio, it works sort of like the ladder, right? So you leave school, and if you have the chops, then you go to a very small market. You're going to Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan.
Right.
And then you're going to Regina. Then you go maybe to Winnipeg, and then you might go to Thunder Bay. Then you go to Sudbury. Then you move your way up, and then you go to here, and then you get to one of the major 10 markets in Canada. So I got very lucky that when I finished radio, first of all, I went to university and I got an English degree, and I realized I don't know how to do anything. So I went back to college for radio broadcasting, audio engineering, and then I knew how to solve a problem for someone. So back to what I was saying, I landed at a radio station called FM 96 in London, Ontario,
Yeah.
and sure
Nearby
enough,
me. Yeah.
yeah,
Great radio station.
they had just launched a brand new morning show and they needed a producer. And I just happened to be there, and it was something that I knew how to do, and it was something that I had focused on in school. So talk about landing like square peg, square hole. They just happened to need someone, and I was cheap because I was young. I worked for, like pizza gift cards basically back then. And I was flying the helicopter proverbially. So I was the guy behind the digital audio console. I was answering phones and I was sliding things, turning mics on and off. The hosts at the time would bring me on sort of to make fun of me. You know what I mean? They would bring me on to tease me, and it turns out that we had kind of good chemistry on air. Our sense, each of our senses of humors kind of worked along with the other ones. So after a short while, the big bosses of the station said, "Would you like to actually be on air?" And it wasn't something that I had really thought about. I just wanted to be the technical producer. But I said, "Yeah, I'll give this a whirl." And then, sure enough, a couple months later, my name was on the marquee with the rest of them. And then that was what launched the next decade of, morning radio on-air performance, in addition to actually continuing to work the gear, so to speak.
Hmm.
So why am I not there anymore? Well, I kind of looked over the horizon and I said, I don't like where this is going. And I
Radio in
said,
general.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they were trying to fire their way to profitability. They were just kind of shedding people left and right. And, by the time I decided I need to make a move to get out of this because I don't know what's going to be left in the future. Like everybody at the station, like their business card was the size of an iPad because everyone went from having one job title to 15 job titles because they'd fire 9 people and then they'd just kind of download all those
Yeah.
responsibilities on the sad sacks that were still there. So yeah, they were lucky to still have jobs, I suppose, but now they had 15 more jobs and they certainly weren't making any more money. So I looked and I said, okay, I think podcasting is where it's going to go. So I took a leap and I worked for myself for a number of years, just doing audio production, live audio recording for a few production companies here in the Toronto area. And then the strategic coach opportunity presented itself. I met Dan and we agreed on a vision for the podcast network as Strategic Coach, and we began working on it. And now here we are. 6 years later, I've been with Strategic Coach, work very closely with Dan, and we have a small collection of very successful podcasts which achieve their goals, which is to marinate curious entrepreneurs around the globe and to let them know who we are, because that's the ultimate goal. We play the long game. This marketing, like our podcasts are a marathon, not a sprint, right? We are trying to educate people, give them free value, let them know what we're up to, let them know what we're doing. And then when the time comes, should they not qualify for coach right now, because there are qualification criteria. If they don't qualify now, if the day should come that they do qualify, who will they think of but us? Because we are the ones that were with them when they weren't quite there yet. That's sort of the philosophy of how we do things with our podcast at Coach. So I hope that summarizes it. Yeah, the long game.
Well, I think that definitely sets you up as, I think you're a good expert and knowledgeable. So this long game thing, do you think that's one of the missteps of new podcasters, not thinking the long game, or is there a place for long game and short games?
Depends what you want to do. I guess if you want to make money, and selling ads is your ultimate goal, and it really helps to be famous. If you're famous and you launch a podcast, there's a pretty good chance you're going to be successful in a very short period of time, and you're going to be able to sell ads and you're going to be able to make money. But for those of us who are not already famous, and you have goals that are not so much that kind of short game, then that's what you probably should be looking at. Because, I'm thinking about like the Call Her Daddy women, Alex, is it Alex? What's her name? Alex Turner? Is that the guy from Arctic Monkeys? Oh my gosh, I can't even remember.
I'm not familiar.
Okay, hopefully we can edit that out. So Call Her Daddy is probably the #1 podcast in the world for women. And it was started by two women who were not famous. They were not celebrities. They were just two women who launched a podcast. They talked about raunchy sex things, and it really hit. And then they had a social media campaign, and they used their social media, and they built it up. And now they have since split up. There were two that launched it. One of them left, and then one of them stuck around. And now she's signing $100 million deals. So that would be what you'd call the absolute unicorn. Someone who is not famous, starts a show out of nowhere, and then they become a centimillionaire. But for the rest of the people...
So that's Alex Cooper, just for
Alex
clarification.
Cooper. Yeah. Yes. Alex Turner is the guy from Arctic Monkeys. I got them mixed up. Yes, Alex Cooper. So now she's got $100 million in the bank. And like I said, not famous before. But if you're looking at that as a model, that would be sort of like, let's talk about like the Ryan Reynolds. How did he get famous? He was going to university somewhere in British Columbia, Canada, decided he wanted to be an actor. He packed up his really crummy car with every worldly possession he had, and he drove down to Los Angeles, and now he's Ryan Reynolds. Mm-hmm. So, but for every one person like that who would have like a unicorn story, there's thousands more that will not happen to. So going for that quick buck, to answer your question, and expecting that to happen is such a rarity that I don't think it's something that you can really bank on. But if you want to play this long game, so to speak, and you have other elements of your business, like at Strategic Coach, a lot of people, launch a podcast because they want to inevitably sell a program or a knowledge product later. Well, Strategic Coach and Dan Sullivan, we had a program already and we had knowledge products already. And then the podcasts were sort of introduced later on to support that. So we did it, Dan kind of did it backwards. You know what I mean? He's not a launch podcast to sell something.
Dan's been at this for 35 years.
This year, 35 years.
I mean, for coaching programs, yeah.
Yeah, both as a one-on-one and then as part of the workshop program that we do right now. So the podcasts were brought in to supplement and to support something that already existed, not to help launch or create something that was forthcoming. So it was done kind of backwards. But that's the way we've always seen it, is playing the long game. Again, going back to what I said before, is like supporting the people, who may or may not qualify for coach. If you qualify for coach, then certainly we'd love to hear from you and talk to you now and hopefully have you join us and be a valued member of our community. But if you're not quite there yet, you can, digest and absorb all of this free instruction and education, ideas, thought processes. And then when you do qualify, ideally, and you are looking for entrepreneurial coaching, who are you going to think of but the people who helped you along the way?
So long game, you're talking about more than 16, 20 episodes, more than a year?
I mean, if you can do it within 16 episodes, then power to you. But what we know about podcasting and the long tail is a very small percentage of the podcasts that are available right now have the overwhelming majority of people listening to them. And there are lots of shows that exist that have almost no one listening to them. So when we talk about things like, well, there's 4 million index podcasts, there's 5 million, and no one can really agree on the actual number. The overwhelming majority of them don't have that many people listening to them. And most of them are stuffed into the Rogans of the world and the Call Her Daddies of the world and the Dave Ramsey and those shows that are really, really, really at the top, like the charting shows that you see. 90% of the audience will be dedicated to those top 100 programs. And everyone else is sort of, if you've niched down, that's fine. You're going to have your niche. But like there's not, I'm kind of the opinion, like there's not enough room for 10 million podcasts that have 10 million people listening to them, because all people would do from the moment they wake up, the entire population of planet Earth would do nothing but wake up and listen to podcasts from 6 o'clock in the morning until 6 p.m. until you collapse and your ears start bleeding. So there's not enough room. There's not enough ears. There's not enough time in the clock that we all adhere to have that many. So there will be a separation between those that will be just like anything, though. There will be success stories and there will be stories of, for lack of a better descriptor, we'll call it failure. And that's a subjective term because it will be a failure in the eyes of the person who had set out to do something and didn't accomplish it. But if your goal was to launch a podcast, to have fun, to educate your clients, to educate your community, to entertain people, let's not forget about that.
Right.
Then you are successful. Now, you may not be making the $100 million deals, but establish those goals right before you start so you have some kind of benchmark. Like you need a target, right? You need to know what you're aiming for. Otherwise, you're just kind of flapping in the breeze.
Yeah. Excuse me. For me, I started measure on impact versus listeners. Does that make sense to go along that line?
Sure.
Like my niche market's very small, very direct. I know I can't get millions of listeners or downloads because it's just not that big, that market, but I know I'm having an impact. Is that along the lines of the long-term game, or is that more of a focus would affect how you would want to do a podcast?
It's a great strategy because niching down makes a lot of sense. So I spoke to someone, this is years ago, and he was talking about a podcast, and it was a podcast for optometrists who own their own practice and the building that the practice is in.
Wow.
So I don't know how you can get much more niche than that. So you might think, well, all 6 people who listen to that show must really like it. But no, the guy had something like 400 or 500 dedicated fans. And he knows that he's never going to have 1 million people listening to the program. But of those 600 or 500 people that were listening to it, they were devout and they were listening and his numbers were consistent. And yeah, they weren't growing necessarily. They were sort of creeping up. But he's already limited himself. So you might say, well, why would he limit himself? Why wouldn't he just make a show for everyone? Well, when you're making a show for everyone, who are you making it for? No one, because nothing appeals to everyone. There's not a single form of entertainment or an entertainer that appeals to everyone. There are people that certainly try. Like, again, if we use the unicorn before, like there'll never be another Michael Jackson. There'll never be another Elvis Aaron Presley. There'll never be another person that we can all universally agree on is the number one entertainer in the world, because everything's been so compartmentalized right now, right? Like you stop 100 people on the street and you say, who's the biggest celebrity in the world? You're going to have 100 different answers because everyone to each individual person, someone is the biggest in the world. Like to this guy, it might be some gamer that André, you and I have never heard of. And then to someone else, like You might have 5 Taylor Swifts, but I guarantee you're going to have 95 after you've done your 5 Taylor Swifts, you're going to have 95 other people. And there's going to be some other person who has this, like, I don't know, a guy who plays cricket in Mumbai is the biggest celebrity in the world. So everyone has their own little niche now. So to follow that pattern, there's absolutely no problem with niching down, uh, depending on what you want to do, and who you're trying to reach, right? I think like the overarching sentiment here, the overarching theme is like, decide why you're doing it. And because everyone else is doing it, I don't think is necessarily a good enough reason, because you're going to run out of gas really quickly if you're not doing it and if you don't think it's fun. If it feels like a chore and if it feels like something you're doing just because everyone else seems to be doing it right now, then it's probably not a good enough reason.
Right. So 90% of the people are listening to the top charters, you just said.
Yep.
And if we're niching down, then we're really narrowing the amount of people that can listen to it. And if we just try and get out of our heads this vanity metrics and be conscious on, it makes sense. If that guy's got 500 listeners, dedicated listeners about optometrists practicing in their own building, those are really good numbers. And if he's maintaining that, I think that's really good. So with that in mind, how do we get people to our podcast and to get out to more people if we've niched down?
I think your list is critical.
What do you mean by list?
So your email list. For
Okay.
any business, they have a list. Most businesses have newsletters. People keep in touch with those who've purchased from you, and there's a database of that. Ideally, there's something you're sending to them. There's people who are opting into that. That's your start, because that's your community. Your community these people are going to be your most vocal advocates. These are the people that are going to tell people about what you're doing. These are the people that are going to be the most likely to listen to it. And these are the people that are already with you for some reason, and they have a relationship with you already. They want to deepen that relationship. They want to tell others, and be an advocate for you. So that's a great start. But I was thinking about this whole thing about marketing podcasts when you and I were chatting about doing the show today. And one thing that would make me a liar is for me to sit here with you, Andre, and to say, here's what you do if you want to have a 1 million download listen podcast. You're going to launch it. You're going to do this. Then you're going to do this. Then you're going to do this, and there you go. You've got it. It's impossible to say that, because what works, we know that marketing is an inexact science. It's all guesses and bets, as Dan Sullivan says. What worked for you in your business outside of podcasting, the things that work for you to market your business might not work for someone who does similar things to what you do.
Right. Exactly.
And the things that they do might not work for you. So we were talking about Alex Cooper and the Call Her Daddy podcast. You know, they created like a social media firestorm, and it was all based on social media and this raunchy show about sex that has since, branched out, and she does other things now. I'm not a fan of her content, but I'm just a fan of what she accomplished, right? So you would think, okay, so I'm going to follow that model. I'm going to have a podcast. We're going to talk about raunchy sex things. We're going to have a big social media presence, and then we're going to be signing $100 million deals. Well, it's already been done once before, so it worked for her, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for you. Some people find great success with host-read ads. So I'm thinking of someone like Jordan Harbinger. Jordan Harbinger has a big podcast, and I saw him on stage one time. He was at a conference, and he was talking about this, that, and he goes, people talk about, like, what is the magic bullet here? How do I get a show? How do I get my show to be the size of yours? Like, what did you do? What did you do? He goes, okay, everybody get ready. Get your pencils out. Get your little notepad. I'm going to tell you how to do it. He said, I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars of my own money. That's what I did. I was spending he was spending something like $24,000 a month on host-read ads. So he was approaching podcasts that were similar to his, or shows that he believed had an audience that he would like to capture, and he was paying somewhere around $24,000, maybe a little bit more even, to have that podcast host be an advocate for him and say, hey, if you like this show, then you might like this show. So he invested a lot of money. So there's one thing. If you have $24,000 a month that you want to invest in host-read ads, then that could be effective for you, or it might not work at all. So Then there's things like feed swaps. If you have, you go on Apple and you see your program, if you scroll right down to the bottom, there's going to be a little strip of shows and it said, you might like.
Mhm.
That's the algorithm telling you other shows out there that are similar to yours. So if you know any of these people or if you have any desire to create a relationship with them, you can do feed swaps. So they put one episode of your show on their podcast and you take one of their episodes and you put it on yours. So you're basically trading audiences. You're giving them a little appetizer. Okay,
Yeah.
that's something that people do. That works for some people, that doesn't work for others. So I may sound like a flake here, like I'm flip-flopping, I'm not giving any information at
No, I
all.
think it's a lot of good information, and there is no one size fits all. What I heard
Yep.
from you is how it worked for a bunch of different people won't work for you. Another way I found to grow my audiences was being a guest on other podcasts where potential audience members might be in.
Huge.
So,
It's a wonderful way to grow your show and to mention it as well. So be active in your community. I hate the term thought leader. I just think it's so overused. Like
mhm.
anybody, like everyone's a thought leader now, but so if you want to, let's take that back to its base. What it used to mean when the term was actually coined, like someone who actually is a thought leader, not everyone who just calls themselves that. If you are, and Andre, like I would go so far as to say you are a thought leader in the space that you occupy, which is successful, talented, ambitious entrepreneurs, and your niche for your podcast is ADHD.
Yeah.
So I don't know of anyone else doing those kinds of things that you're doing. So if someone were to say to me, "Hey, do you know someone who is talking about these kinds of things?" There's only one name that would pop into my mind, and that's you. So you do fill that
Mhm.
category of thought leader in the space that you're occupying. So just to sort of summarize, like about the marketing thing that I was saying, it is all guesses and bets. Something that may work really well for you might not work for someone else, and vice versa. So what you're going to try and do is leverage all the low fruit, like get the low fruit first, which is your community, your
Mhm.
list, your customers, the people who are closest to you, the people who would be most active and willing to be an advocate for you, to tell people about programs. Word of mouth is the best form of advertising. It's better than ads. It's better than anything else because a really high percentage of people, they did a survey and they were talking to people who listen to podcasts and they said, "Do you have a favorite show?" And they said, "Yes, I do." They said, "How did you hear about it?" And it was something like 65% of people said, "Someone told me about it. Someone I like, know, and trust told me about it."
Mhm.
It is the most powerful way to grow your program is to have someone who really likes your program tell someone else about it and encourage them to listen because that's where most people heard about their favorite podcast. Someone I like, know, and trust told me about it. And it's free.
Yeah, costs you hardly anything. And I'm starting to see that being shared. I'm getting more people commenting that a friend shared my podcast with them. But it's about the third year mark. I start to seeing an uptick on referrals, and that's why I like when you talked about the long game earlier. It is a long game, and like in to your point earlier, like 90% of the audience are tied to the top charters for listening, and niching down will help separate you, but it's a smaller market. And how are you going to measure those metrics is very important. So it's important for you, for your self-conscious and morale. And
Mm-hmm.
that marketing is not a one size fits all. Build it up from your community first, who will be a great advocate for you.
Mm-hmm.
And what I like what you said here, Gord, is you didn't give us a step by step playbook here. It's just like, these are general things to consider, and it's your game. Figure it out, and you got to experiment. So, unfortunately, we're running out of time here, Gord. Do you have any last comments or recommendation to people considering doing their podcast or have a podcast that can do something to improve their game?
Well, I hope I gave some actionable tips, but just a few like little nuggets I can wrap with. The word "you" is powerful. One thing I hear a lot in podcasts is people address their audience like they're some kind of Russian czar standing on a
Yeah.
balcony, like barking over their subjects. But what we know is like 98% of podcast listening is done alone. So when you are addressing people, saying the word "you" is powerful. And if you don't do it, it's not the end of the world, but you're missing an opportunity to create a connection with that person who's listening to you. They're all alone with you. They're in the shower with you. They're walking their dog with you, but they're all by themselves. They're listening alone. So the word you, thank you for listening today. I hope you enjoyed this. How do you feel about this? Hey, this happened to me. Has this ever happened to you? That's
So make it a conversation with the listener.
it's a one-on-one connection. It's like, hey, all you people out there in podcast land, radio land. You're missing an opportunity. No one is going to rip their phone out of their hand and throw it in the creek if you do address people as a large group. What I'm suggesting is creating a connection one-on-one, because we know everybody is listening to you alone, and it's very intimate, the intimate power of the human voice. One human talking to another human. So use the word you and try and move away from addressing your audience as an enormous group. Second thing I'd like to say is this is show business, whether you like it or not.
Ooh.
And you are not competing against all the other podcasts that people could be listening to with that half hour of their time. You're competing against all the other things that people could be doing with that half hour of their time. So if doom scrolling Twitter is more entertaining than your half hour podcast, you're not going to win. So don't forget to try to be at least entertaining. And it's not about forcing it. If you're just not a funny person, or if just comedy is not your thing, then forcing it is going to actually be counterproductive. But we have to, one thing that I hear about in terms of business podcasts, because I listen to a lot of entrepreneurially focused podcasts, because that's my niche. They're so boring and dry, and people have forgotten that this is entertainment. And I wish that they would at least try to be a little bit more entertaining. Maybe try to crack a joke, try to craft stories that have some kind of payoff that might make someone smile or make someone think, as opposed to just like rhyming off all these facts and figures. And we talked about, we shared some statistics today, but there was always like a story kind of wrapped around it. We weren't just sitting here like barking math at people, because none of that's going to resonate anyway. So don't forget that this is show business, and the point of it is to be entertaining. And when you think in those terms that you're not just competing against other podcasts, but all the other things people could be doing with their time, try and weave some form of entertainment into the show. Don't be afraid to be silly. Don't be afraid to tease your co-host a little bit if you want, because at the end of the day, people need to feel as though they were entertained. And that's one thing that will bring them back to you. They got the information that they wanted, but if you can wrap that information in a format or a presentation that is entertaining to them, that's going to keep them coming back to you and away from the others who are not as entertaining. It's showbiz, baby. That's what it is. And so many people have never heard that or not realized
I never thought of it from that way myself. So that's good. I learned something today.
Yes. If you can't be funny, be compelling. If you can't be compelling, be relevant. If you can't be relevant, play another song. That's from the old radio days. Play Britney Spears.
Yeah.
You got to be one of those things. Otherwise, just shut up and play another song. So those are the things that you should try and keep in mind as you're doing your show. Yeah, there's a lot of information we want to share. There's a lot of things we want people to do. We want them to do this, this, this. Don't forget to be entertaining.
Cool. That's a great way to end the episode. So thanks again, Gord, for joining us and sharing your knowledge and expertise. Podcasting is a constant growth medium. That's what I heard. The more you do, the more you will learn, and your message will spread long term. And for you, the listener, what is the reason for your podcast, or potentially a podcast you want to create? Let me know. I'd really like to hear what your purpose is for your podcast. You can email me at André@theimpulsivethinker.com. And Gord, thanks again, buddy.
My pleasure.
And to you, the listeners, thanks again for learning with me. Talk to you soon.